You tell me when to start.
I'll be happy to go ahead and share my screen, Ruby, and you can start whenever
Please.
you're ready. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Welcome to Building Partnerships Between Community Groups and Water Systems. My name is Ruby Stemmle, and I'm the founder and CEO of EcoLatinos, and we're part of the planning committee of this forum. I'm just gonna share with you some housekeeping information. This session will be recorded. I think we can show the next slide for housekeeping. The session will be recorded and made available at a later date. All attendees should be muted, please. And please use the chat box or the Q&A features in Whova or in Zoom if you have questions throughout the session. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact the host. They'll do their best to help you out. We encourage you to rename yourselves with your preferred name, pronouns, and organizations. And to do that, you can hover your mouse over your image to show the drop-down menu and select rename. Lastly, the rest of the forum schedule can be found in Whova. And please, well, now I guess I'd like to introduce the presenters and meet Katherine Koch, Water Policy Director at the WaterNow Alliance, April Ingle, Policy Director at the River Network, Nissa Dean, State Director, Virginia Office of the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, and Adam Lynch, River Steward at Friends of the Rappahannock. And I just pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Ruby. We really appreciate that introduction. And hey, everyone, it's great to be here with you today. Thanks for joining this session. Again, my name is April Ingle. I am the Policy Director at River Network. I'm very excited to be joined by Caroline, Nissa, and Adam today to talk about the building blocks of trust when it comes to building partnerships between local community groups and water utilities. I am based out of High Point, North Carolina, which is on the lands of the Catawba people. And yeah, just really excited to be with you today. So just as a quick, before we begin, a quick walkthrough of what we're going to cover today. Thanks to Ruby for those introductions and welcome and housekeeping notes. Our plan for the day is to just sort of walk through this work that we have been doing together on understanding what the building blocks of trust are. While I'm going through our game plan for this workshop today, we'd love it if you could introduce yourself in the chat as well. We just would like to get to know you and give you the opportunity to get to meet each other as well. So we're going to begin today's workshop with Caroline and I reviewing what we learned through the process of learning what the building blocks of trust are for local community groups and water utilities when they're looking to form and build durable and trusting relationships. Following that, we're going to, as a group, discuss those building blocks of trust and get your reactions, your reflections, your own personal experiences, as well as your questions that you may have about building partnerships between community groups and water utilities. And then we are going to hear about two partnership case studies from the Chesapeake Watershed. First, Nissa is going to tell us about the partnership between the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay and Richmond Department of Public Utilities. You'll have a chance to ask Nissa questions, and then we'll hear from Adam about the partnership that Friends of the Rappahannock have been forming with Defensores de la Cuenca and the City of Fredericksburg Department of Public Works. And then following Adam's case study, we'll all engage in some discussion and reflection and sharing, as well as the opportunity to ask more questions of the presenters. So that's our game plan for today. And so, but to begin, what we'd like to do is just hear from you. And so we're going to use this application called Slido to facilitate some of our collaboration and sharing during the workshop. So for those of you who have not used Slido before, there are two ways that you can use it. While you're watching the presentation on the computer, you can use your smartphone to use Slido. So to do that, what you'd want to do is open up the camera app on your smartphone, like you're going to take a picture, but instead of taking a picture, just hold the camera up to the QR code on the computer screen, and your phone should prompt you to open up Slido on your phone. And to do that, then you would see the question would show up for you, and you can answer it on your phone. The other option is to just open up a window in your internet browser. You'll enter slido.com in the address bar, and when the web page opens, you should see at the top a place to enter the code for the session, which is 026420, and you can see that there on the left side of the screen. And so then everyone should see the question in front of them if they've gone to Slido in one of those two ways. And once you're there, weigh in. We'd love to have you tell us how you would characterize your relationship with your local water utility, if you're a community group, or if you're a local water utility or local government, what your relationship is with your local community group. If you have other comments or questions or reflections or want to elaborate on your choice, you're welcome to also drop that in the chat. All right, so I'll give everybody just a few seconds to consider their choice. And to weigh in. It looks like we're probably really close to giving everybody the opportunity to weigh in. So it looks like most folks are on the scale of sort of somewhere in the middle, somewhere there towards the middle of the range. And so the average score there is 3.7. And for those of you who can see the chat in Whova, has anybody had any reflections on their choice? All right, great. Well, it's good to see where everybody stands. It looks like for the majority of us are sort of right there in the middle, which I think is a really good spot for us in our conversations today in terms of seeing what some of the insights are from some of these partnerships that we've been learning from about what it takes to build durable and trusting relationships. So now with that foundation, Caroline and I want to share a little bit about what we've learned through our process to understand what the building blocks of trust are when local community groups and water utilities work together to form and build those durable and trusting relationships.
Great, thanks, April. Yeah, it was really interesting to see everyone's responses on that, and good to see everyone's right there in the middle. No ones or twos, which was nice. So I have a few questions for you this afternoon about this trust building work. So let's just start off. What is the building blocks of trust effort, and why did River Network and WaterNow decide to partner on this project? Yeah,
so to begin, I think it's really important to look at the big why of why we wanted to partner on this together, Caroline. So I think probably many of us that are in this workshop today are likely to agree that public investment in environmentally sustainable as well as equitable water infrastructure is something that's crucially needed for the health and safety of our communities and our waterways. So both of our organizations, WaterNow Alliance, where Caroline is, and River Network, we, as well as I'm sure many of you all who are in this workshop, have seen evidence that strong and authentic relationships between local community groups and water systems that are built on trust, that those have been really pivotal when it comes to achieving both equitable and sustainable water systems. So some examples of this that we saw before we started doing this work together were evidence of where community-based organizations and water systems came together, for instance, to distribute water filters. Also working together to conduct water quality monitoring to get a better sense of what the health and safety is of the water. Working together to install green infrastructure in neighborhoods. Also working together to develop workforces that were needed in the community to do this work. And also where community groups and utilities have worked together to protect source water or drinking water sources. So we also saw that to be successful and long lasting, these types of partnerships between water systems and community groups, they really depended on some core operating strategies, such as things that we saw were like robust stakeholder engagement, community participation in utilities designing their programs, increasing transparency, and also like really focusing on having open lines of communication between the community and the utility. So given all of that and the big why around this need for equitable water infrastructure investment, and what the crucial role is that we saw of these partnerships between community groups and water utilities, that we, River Network and WaterNow Alliance, wanted to work together, because WaterNow works a lot with the utilities and local governments. River Network works a lot with community groups. Was like, how could we team up and find some of these great examples of these partnerships so that the rest of us could learn from them, especially those of us who are interested in doing something similar. And we're really lucky to have Nissa and Adam here today to tell us about their real world experience with forming those relationships and what they learned along the way.
Absolutely. And that's such a great summary. And WaterNow has really enjoyed working with River Network on this project. It's been really fun learning from all the groups, and really excited to see some of the final results. Before we dig into, what those best practices are that we identified in those building blocks, tell us a little bit about what the process was that we used to carry out the project.
Yeah. So the approach that we took was trying to find those bright spots. We wanted to learn from these existing water utility and community group partnerships that have built these trusting, durable, long-lasting relationships. And we also wanted to learn what the conditions were that were in place so that those could be replicated in places where others wanted to give that a try. So we started by creating a work group of these successful community and water utility partnerships. And these partnerships we identified them through some research that we just did based on the knowledge that Caroline and her teammates at WaterNow Alliance knew about the groups they were working with, the groups that we knew at River Network, as well as we put out an open request for proposals and said, hey, are you in one of these partnerships? If so, let us know. And then when we picked the 9 groups that were that we chose to learn from, we looked for geographic diversity, diversity of the water system types and the size of community that those water systems were serving. And also we wanted to focus on partnerships that were addressing equity in their work or water affordability. So based on all of that, we selected these 9 partnerships that you can see in blue on this map. And we called that our Water Trust Work Group. And each of the work group members, they participated in a separate 1-hour in-depth interview, and we asked them questions about how their relationship got started, how did it form, what were the goals, how have they maintained it over time, and what were some of the hard times and what were some of the successes. And we also wanted to hear about the community and what the characteristics were like, how they communicate with each other in their partnership, how they overcame challenges that they encountered, and just what the lessons learned were along the way and things that surprised them as well. So after we got done with all those interviews, we analyzed them to identify common threads, and we were then able to identify 8 best practices that we're going to talk about here in just a second, or that I want you to tell us about, Caroline. And we shared those back with the work group to get their reactions and further input to make sure we had heard them right. And so then those final practices all reflect what we learned sort of cohesively amongst all those work group members, and hopefully those lessons can be applied by other communities who want to do similar type partnerships. And then the other piece of this was we took these best practices on a test drive with 3 communities. Those are the ones that are highlighted in orange. And Adam is representing one of those communities that those partnerships received $5,000 in funding support to help support their partnership. And then they also received technical assistance from WaterNow Alliance and River Network and some from outside consultants that we were able to bring in as well. And then the next step will be that very soon, like within the next couple of weeks, we're going to be publishing a report that outlines what these building blocks of trust are, as well as telling the stories of the different work group members that participated. And we hope that that'll serve as a really great reference and workbook for folks who are wanting to develop partnerships themselves. Yeah, so that's kind of a summary of like how we identified these best practices. And so Caroline, you want to dive in and take a look at what we found out and what the recommendations were from the work group on how to build trusting and durable partnerships?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, awesome.
Quite the process.
Totally. Yeah. So Caroline, just tell us, just as a starting place, give us an outline of what we learned from this process.
Yeah, so I think one of the big places to start on what we learned on these 8 best practices that you can see on here, and we'll dig into what each one is that it really isn't a linear process. It's, as we talked about, that there's a range of places where folks start on the trust spectrum. And so these really are a constellation of practices that can be used in any order, depending where folks are in their relationship with their utility and the community group. And so as we'll cover in our discussion, some of the best practices do overlap and have similar building blocks to implementing them. But because we did need to group them in some logical order as we go through, we really started with the most conceptual or foundational of these building blocks, and then move towards the more practical or functional as we go. So as you can see, we've kind of created a constellation of these 8 building blocks, and you can mix and match however best fits your community.
Great. So when there were 2 best practices that sort of stood out as sort of foundational. Can you tell us about why dedication to honesty and transparency and restoring trust were the 2 key building blocks that we heard were really important?
Yeah, so we put these first on the list because, as you say, they are so foundational to the other 6 practices, and it won't be surprising to anyone that trusting relationships depend on honesty and transparency from everyone involved. And while, as I mentioned, the practices don't need to be applied in any particular order, we did hear in our discussions and those interviews that you were mentioning that because trust can be so fragile, honesty and transparency really do need to underscore all the ways that community groups and utilities engage with each other. And so we also heard that several of the relationships had started from a place where trust between the community and the water utility had unfortunately eroded and needed to be rebuilt. So the communities there that were successful were those that were able to take a step back and consider a new approach to engaging with each other, and come to the table really ready to listen and respond and, deploy some staff who were committed to and experienced with these community-based processes. So we put these right up front, nothing groundbreaking, but really important to highlight at the outset.
Yeah. And so then tell us a little bit more about what were some of the other, then after you sort of have those two foundational building blocks in place, what were some of the other key ingredients that were in that constellation of best practices and foundations that the work group identified?
Yeah, so the next two we have here on deepening community understanding and including the community as part of utility decision-making really were the next two that help operationalize some of these more conceptual ideas that to build trust, we really need to have, the community needs to have a strong working understanding of that particular utility's roles and responsibilities. And that having that deep nuanced grasp of what the utility's jurisdiction and purposes and missions are really puts the community groups in a position to initiate and maintain and grow relationships with that utility. And to get to that point of that deeper understanding, we heard too that it's important for the community group and the utility to work together to educate themselves about the utility as well as the community groups from the utility side. So we've grouped these two together because as another key way to strengthening these partnerships is really, again, integrating the community into the decision-making of the utility. That's either, a part of a specific process that's already underway or, part of the utility governance more generally through an advisory board or a special council that has, meaningful opportunity for input. And, a community that's well informed about utility roles and missions and jurisdiction will be particularly primed to engage in those decision-making processes.
Yeah. Yep. And those were all just like such really valuable insights and sort of what it really takes to why, I guess, transparency and what's really needed to operationalize these relationships and partnerships.
Absolutely.
So shifting now to the nuts and bolts of the best practices, what did we learn about the ways in which partnerships recognize shared goals and build trust with each other?
Yeah, so, we're able to see that identifying these shared goals and recognizing mutual benefit to both the utility and the community group and meeting those shared goals can not only help build those trusting relationships, but create support for them into the long term because you're working towards, an end goal and a mutual objective. And their interviews really described how recognizing these mutual benefits can help create those open lines of communication that you mentioned there, so important, and pathways to overcoming challenges because, again, you're working toward that mutually beneficial end goal. And then as a related practice on this more nuts and bolts kind of efforts for utilities or local government, you can help build trust by viewing their goals and role in the community more broadly. So this might look like establishing flexible staff roles and a corresponding internal structure that helps break down some silos, making deliberate decisions to center community partnerships as part of the utility work, and just being open to more new approaches about community engagement and substantive water planning and management decisions. So really becoming that anchor institution in the community.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, those were really important insights. So once a partnership knows what their shared goals and common interests are, what did you learn about how this all gets operationalized? Like, what do these partnerships actually look like in real life?
Yeah, so we heard that most trusting relationships between the water utilities and community groups are based on some level on personal relationships and connecting with people in an effective and authentic way. So this often stemmed from utility staff who were making intentional efforts to get out into the community, or with community groups really proactively reaching out to the water utilities and inviting them to events and participate in stuff they had going on. And so the key here really is identifying the right contact as well within the organization, the utility or the community group, to lead on that relationship and then strengthen them over time through those open and ongoing communications. So we also heard that, while personal relationships were a foundational building block, that many of these then did evolve into more formalized engagements, that there was really a continuum of engagement that began with the communication, built up to some coordination, and then really turned into full-on collaboration, working together on specific projects, that type of thing. So we also heard too that while the formalities like these grant agreements or contracts or governance structures did surface as important tools to creating enduring relationships that lasted into the future and staff changeover, it also really stood out to us in our conversations that the formalized partnerships did benefit from flexibility that allows the parties to respond to lessons learned, as well as changing needs and priorities as you are identifying those mutual goals. They might change over time, and having the ability to shift with that.
Yeah, those were really important insights, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Nissa and Adam to sort of tell us what this looks like in the real world too here in just a minute. And before we get to that though, we did want to just pause there. That's kind of just the end of the overview that the questions I wanted to ask Caroline to sort of share back with us what we learned and kind of give you all an overview of how we got here. But we want to pause before we turn it over to Nissa and Adam, to see if you all have any questions. And then we also want to just kind of hear a little bit about how these best practices are resonating with you. So if you have questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. And then we also have another Slido to open up for you all. And if you leave your phone open, the new question should already be up there for you, or you can hit the QR code again or reopen your web browser. You'll see two questions there. What has your experience been with building relationships with groups from other sectors? So if you're a utility with a community group, or if you're a community group with a utility, or really any other kind of partnership that you've built outside of the sector that you operate in. And also, just what are your reflections on how these best practice resonate with you? Is there any that were a surprise? Are there any that you were like, oh yeah, that makes sense, that's my experience? We'd love to just get your reflections as well as hear any questions that you all have. So we'll give everybody a minute just to reflect on that. And if you have questions, we'll be glad to answer them. We also just really curious about hearing from you and what your experiences are, because we can all learn from each other in this space too. So Caroline, we have a question from Rosemary. She's asking, how do you work around public disengagement? Even if you try to build these relationships, they need to want to be in them too. So how do you, if you've got one side that's interested in building a relationship, but the other side is like, I'm not really that interested. what's a way to work around that? Is there anything that comes to mind for you, Caroline, from what we heard? And Nissa and Adam, you're welcome to jump in here too if you have experience with this question, and or anybody else that's on the call, if you've had experience with this, where you kind of have, there's one side that's interested in building a partnership and the other is sort of like, I don't really know what's in this for me, or I'm not really that interested. You're welcome to come off mute. You're welcome to put your thoughts in Slido in the chat. Anything that comes to mind for you, Caroline, from what we learned?
Yeah, I think two of the examples jumped in my mind in response to that is one on the Tucson, Arizona example that we heard, where there had been historical, distrust from some water contamination issues, and a really, for lack of a better word, standoffish community, where the utility did want to reach out and rekindle the relationship. And it took time in order to find the right way for them to re-engage. And I think what really worked for them as a utility, had some new leadership in place and were doing the things internally they needed to do to correct those past missteps, but really finding the trusted voice in the community group, and starting out slow and really just having conversations about what they were doing, and the changes that they had made. And it was over the course of several years, if I remember correctly, before they really got to a better place. But finding that group that had that trust in the community already, and starting out slow with them, to find any open crack in the door, I guess to say, for Tucson. And then on a similar kind of starting small or slow note, it was in New Orleans, where I think we heard from Healthy Community Services that they wanted to reach out to the utility, and they just really weren't sure where to start. And so it was just really minor things. I think the way they shared the relationship getting started was calling up the utility and asking to borrow some tools for a cleanup program that the community group was running. So very, just starting those little things that can get your foot in the door, that seem inconsequential, but can lead to bigger things.
Yeah. And it does seem like this is that there really does have to be some sort of shared goal at the beginning for a partnership to form. Like there has to be a goal that both the community and the utility have, and that they sort of realize that in order for it to be done in a way that's equitable and benefits the community, that the partnership is really a necessary piece of it being pulled off in a way that's successful and equitable. So the shared goals are really sort of one of the foundational pieces.
Absolutely.
Any other questions or reflections before let's see, we have one in the Slido that says, I'm wondering how much of the outreach comes from the municipality versus the community groups. Maybe, so Nissa and Adam, it would be great to hear from both of you during your case studies, like sort of who initiated the partnership, and see if there's a commonality or maybe not. I think from the 9 that I can remember, and Caroline, you might have a better tally in your head. I would say that it was pretty evenly split. There were, in some instances, there were community groups that were like, hey, we have this problem. It's not getting addressed. It's really impacting people in our community, and we need something to be done with it. Will you work with us? And then there were other examples where the utility had this objective, this goal, and they were like, we really need the community's buy-in, participation. In some cases, the utility contracted with the community group to do the outreach in the community because they saw that the community group had the relationships in the community that were really necessary in order to successfully carry out the outreach.
Yeah, that I think that's my recollection as well, that it really was a mix. No one way of doing it.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, thanks so much for those questions. And so now what we want to do is, let me switch our slide here, is we want to turn it over to Nissa to share our first case study about the partnership that that they formed with the city of Richmond on their green stormwater infrastructure program and the RVA H2O and clean water plan. So Nissa, we will now turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history, I guess, of partnership that we've had with the city of Richmond over the years. We have a key project that we're kind of working on and closing out over the next year and a half or so that is a culmination of that partnership. So what I'll do today is kind of take a step back from that. And some of you may have tuned into the presentation we gave yesterday on kind of the technical aspects of that project. I won't focus much on that today. Today, I'm going to focus really on the partnership with the city. So how we got started. So actually, the Alliance and the city of Richmond have had a really long-standing relationship. I think starting with our water quality monitoring program and helping folks at the utility there get out and monitor water quality in some of the tributaries that drain into the James River. But most recently, back in about 2013, 2014, the city began a process of developing an integrated water permit. This is allowable by EPA, and they have certain frameworks set up that allow localities to do this. And the city of Richmond kind of took the framework, you see that here on the left side of your screen, and tweaked it a little bit so that they could combine management of drinking water, stormwater, and wastewater into one permit. Their hope being that they can leverage resources from the community, from different city departments, and also kind of take a more holistic look at water management and water impacts to develop practices, projects, and also development projects within the city that had a more positive impact on water quality. So all of that resulted in what they now refer to as their integrated permit. Part of that process also was pulling together stakeholders from throughout the city, but also throughout the region. Neighboring localities were involved in the process. The Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay was involved in the process, as was James River Association, the Bay Foundation, Richmond Regional Planning District Commission. It was really comprehensive. Universities were involved and invited to the table. And so all of those folks over the course of maybe 3 years met and identified different needs relative to management of each of those water sources and things and priorities that they felt the city should keep into consideration as they were working through developing what this would look like. The process was facilitated by University of Virginia's Institute for Engagement and Negotiation. So they had someone kind of outside who could really intentionally listen to the comments that everyone had and present, an unbiased place and a safe place for people to feel like they were heard and then their comments could be addressed. And that was also key to the process. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the Alliance has been partnered with the city of Richmond for years, even before this integrated permit process was initiated. And as part of that, we've implemented projects on Richmond public school properties. We've implemented projects on alleyways, streets, all over the place, different parks. And there's been kind of a key theme throughout a lot of those projects. And I think a lot of our nonprofit partners would say the same thing. And this feedback was also shared through that planning process that formed that integrated permit. And part of that was that we have great ideas, the city has a lot of support and partners and nonprofits who are excited about doing good things for water quality. But there was, often roadblocks and barriers that we encountered. And so part of that process was to discuss openly what those roadblocks and barriers were. Next slide. So that we could think and implement more efficiently the projects that are coming in the future. This slide here shows the east end of the city of Richmond, a community known as Greater Fulton. There is a business district there that the Alliance has partnered with the city on, as well as folks in the East End and Innovate Fulton to green that community and that business corridor in a meaningful way to the public and to the community there. They've been asking for it for a long time. And so we're working with the community members, we're working with the city of Richmond, and kind of using this as yet another example of how when you pull together all of those resources and have that trusting relationship with the city, we can see really positive results. Next slide. So some common experiences, I started to touch on this a minute ago, among those projects is that we have had tremendous support from the City of Richmond's Department of Public Utilities. So the integrated permit formed what is known as the Clean Water Plan for the City of Richmond. And that Clean Water Plan outlines specific watersheds that need improvement over the next 5 years. And we're kind of getting to the end of that. So I think the city is working on their next 5-year clean water plan. But what that allowed to do with inputs in that planning process was, in that clean water plan, identify opportunities and specific focus areas of focus that other nonprofits and could partner with the city of Richmond to implement practices, green infrastructure practices, projects, restoration projects, that sort of thing. So it does provide a nice framework for how we go about doing that. And knowing that these resources exist, we can marry those with other planning efforts in the city of Richmond, and the city's been intentional about doing that as well. They've worked hard to include the Clean Water Plan goals and objectives in the Richmond 300 master planning effort, as well as other sustainability planning efforts and throughout the city. So our funders, such as National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, our corporate funders in Richmond, Altria, Luck, a lot of those folks see the work that's going on and the intentionality behind it, and want to help support other nonprofit organizations and community groups to implement these projects. So we see a lot of support, and that's a really great aspect of the work that's been done. But we still see a lot of challenges too. And some of those challenges for us on the outside are the permit review and approval time. I think that's a known entity in most municipalities. Some lack of collaboration between departments. So Public Works isn't always aware of what Public Utilities is doing, or Economic Development isn't aware, or, just even if they were aware 6 months ago, they're so busy and inundated with so much work all of the time that it takes constant communication and meeting and coordination to make sure that folks are aware and remember kind of what we agreed on and what we're working on. Otherwise, we will run into issues with prolonged or delayed installation. And then maintenance. Maintenance is a continual challenge as well in all municipalities. So working together with other nonprofits such as Groundwork, RBA, we are trying to help the city with those issues. Money is always a problem when it comes to maintaining green infrastructure practices and parks. So finding creative solutions to those challenges is also part of what we are all working on. Next slide. So I put this in here just kind of as along the way. This is something that we feel quite often. So we'll think we're halfway there or most of the way there and addressing those challenges, and then we'll have another shoot off of kind of an issue or a question or lack of coordination, and we'll go, oh, but I thought we were doing things correctly, and we'll feel a lot of confusing thoughts. So we're continually trying to address those challenges, and that's where the project that we're funded through NIFWIF right now comes into play. We've been working hard on addressing those challenges. So next slide. The Alliance partnered with RVA H2O, UVA Institute for Engagement and Negotiation, to bring in Arcadis to help us develop a green infrastructure master plan and also a ranking and prioritization tool. And what this does is allow us to kind of acknowledge all of those challenges and barriers to green infrastructure implementation and look at ways that we could efficiently prevent, try and head off some of those challenges. And so we presented on this yesterday, just a quick overview. This ranking and prioritization tool takes the city's GIS layers for land use, utilities, where they're located, and marries that with other social equity and health equity databases, as well as urban tree canopy cover, impervious cover, flooding problems, where the CSO is located, that sort of thing, where water quality improvements are needed, i.e. those 3 priority watersheds in the Clean Water Plan I mentioned earlier, and puts all of that into a tool for you that allows you to say, okay, we have a green infrastructure project. It needs to go in on public land. What's the best, where is the best location for this project to go, or what barriers am I going to see if I try to put it in a specific place? And so part of that process, next slide. Sorry. Also included, so we've got the development of kind of technical tools that, should ease the planning process, but that doesn't necessarily ease that collaboration process and communication between departments that really needs to happen so everyone's aware and stays on the same page as these projects move through the different channels of approval. And so a big part of the work that we've done over the last 2 years was holding one-on-one conversations with members of Parks, Rec, and Community Facilities, Department of Public Works, the Office of Sustainability, libraries, planning and development review, as well as Richmond Public Schools. So unfortunately, COVID hit right when we were getting started on this. So all of those meetings were virtual, but we really did have good turnout from all of those meetings. Folks showed up from each of the departments and listened to the goals and objectives that we had in this project and the things that we were trying to resolve, and provided their input. And I think a key measure of success in this work, and hopefully we'll see it long term, was that everybody was really engaged and involved, and we asked for their opinions. So next slide. And I think while trust is kind of the thing that we're talking about, what are those building blocks of trust? Trust is really the critical piece that I think we all have to have. So, and I put this quote up here because I really think it's important to remember that it's not just trust among people on one-off projects. It's really the formation of a team. And I think that is one thing that RVA H2O has strived to do really well, is help bring everybody together so that we feel a little bit more collaborative and a little bit more like a team of folks working together, who share information, who share resources, and who also can share those barriers that they're encountering in an open format. Next slide. Trusting partnerships really are a must. And in order to have those, we really feel like patience is key, but also a lot of what we've heard earlier from April and Caroline is that community buy-in is key. So communication, and even when you think you've communicating more, and not expecting for things to move, really fast. Just take baby steps, celebrate your successes one-on-one, and then continue to communicate, check in, follow up, communicate again. And I think that helps with the building trust, because if you're open and transparent in your communication, then folks know that they're being heard, and you can mirror back those things that they need, and hopefully continue to collaborate so that you'll succeed. So that's it for me. I'll take any questions anyone has.
If you have questions for Nissa, feel free to come off mute and ask them. You can ask them in the chat. And maybe while y'all are thinking about what you want to ask Nissa, I'll follow up with the question that Rosemary asked earlier. Like, what advice would you give if disengagement is sort of what you're encountering, either like from the utility is not really interested in working with you, or the community doesn't really seem that interested in being part of the partnership? Like, the relationships and partnerships are two-way streets. So any strategies that you've learned along the way, Nissa, that sort of can sort of cause those breakthroughs to happen where both sides sort of realize that they need each other?
Well, I can tell you that even when you think you've kind of found some of this sweet spots and secrets to success to avoid those situations, they still happen. One example that was well publicized over the last few weeks in the city of Richmond was that in one of our communities, folks were seeking traffic calming measures. And so they wanted people to slow down. And so the city heard that. And they installed some curb bump outs with plants in them, and they were pretty and it was nice, but they went in and then business owners were like, wait a minute, you just took away our parking. And so while the city was addressing, this concern over safety on one hand and listening to the community, there was a whole nother aspect that wasn't considered to be as big of an issue and ended up resulting in the city pulling out some of the bump outs. So that does result sometimes in disengagement. So the folks who lost parking or the businesses who were concerned about that could easily become disengaged. So I think that's where, when we were talking with DPU and they were talking with Public Works, I think they were all kind of trying to realize, where they could communicate more openly and where the process could be slowed down a little bit so that all comments are heard. I think, the key to re-engaging folks is taking the time to listen and getting out there and asking what they need and trying not to rush through. So those baby steps and taking things slowly, being patient, that's another big piece of it.
Yeah, thank you for that. All right, so if other questions for Nissa come up, we're going to have some time for more Q&A after Adam finishes, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Adam now and let him tell us about the work that they've been doing in Fredericksburg with Friends of the Rappahannock, Defensores de la Cuenca, and the city of Fredericksburg on their partnership building work. So Adam, I am going to now turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, April. So I am Adam Lynch. My position is River Steward for the city of Fredericksburg and Stafford County for Friends of the Rappahannock. So the Rappahannock River is one of the major rivers in Virginia. It originates at Shenandoah National Park and flows down to the Chesapeake Bay. The largest city in the Rappahannock watershed is Fredericksburg, and that's where I'm based. So our watershed is about 18 counties in size, and Fredericksburg and Stafford are the most densely populated area of our watershed. So we also have a lot of river usage here in our central area of the watershed. So in my capacity as the river steward, it's my job to try to make sure that people use the river and understand the river responsibly. So this was a good grant for me to learn a little bit about the community that I serve, and also try to develop a program that would carry on and persist long beyond just the February through July timeframe of our grant program with WaterNow and the River Network. So really the primary goals of this overarching program, which is called Nuestro Rappahannock, which is our Rappahannock in Spanish, was to inform our local residents about the river watershed and how that water is used to improve litter management in the river, because we know that our area of the Rappahannock watershed tends to have more people and consequently more river usage and more plastic pollution. So that's one thing we wanted to work on. And also, perhaps most importantly of all, was to try to encourage river users to use the river more safely. The Rappahannock River in Fredericksburg averages about 2 drownings per year, and they are disproportionately people of Hispanic or Latino background. And the main reason for that is because river users themselves are disproportionately people who are in Hispanic or Latino backgrounds. So this was a good program for us to try to get our feet on the ground. And I do want to provide a disclaimer. We are nowhere near as well developed as Nissa's program. I'm just blown away by how much work they are. I think I would love to see us move in that direction in the future, but we are very much kind of in the early stages of developing our program. Let's go to the next slide. So I thought it would be useful for me to really focus this as a sort of challenge and opportunities, because this program, like I said, was brand new. So we were hitting guardrails and touching hot stoves, and I wanted to make sure that I could communicate that, because I have a feeling that some of the people who are watching this, may not have a program yet, but they're looking at starting one. And I think every organization should be focusing more on reaching people who are not sort of elite educated white people, who tend to be the environmental constituency that we work with most. If we want to be organizations that represent all of the community, you need to talk to people who speak Spanish as their first language and who may not be as engaged with sort of environmental conservation circles historically. So on our first page, I wanted to point out right early on, find the right forum to reach the audience that you want to reach. So we went into this sort of going with our bread and butter. We wanted to reach people who were using the river directly, because we knew that we had people there who already had curiosity, at least, or an affinity for the water. So we wanted to go down to the river and meet people where they were. However, one challenge that we faced was that not everyone who uses the river in the city of Fredericksburg and Stafford County are from Fredericksburg or Stafford County. So before you sort of develop a program exclusively around river users at the river, do a little bit of homework on where those people actually live, the community that they are from. So I'll give you an example. Perhaps our most successful day of outreach was back in July, and we did an outreach program which involved giving away life jackets at the river. So we got a discounted donated group of life jackets, and we did a raffle to make kind of a fun way to get free life jackets down there at the river. We had life jackets, water bottles, reusable cutlery. We took people's name and phone number down, and we called them if they won a life jacket. And at the end of the day, after over 50 entrants into our raffle, not a single one of them was from our local area code, which was astounding to me, but also shows you that you may not be reaching the local people, even if you are working at a local area. One lesson that we learned, though, along the way was that I think this is one thing that I learned was if you ever go to a Hispanic barbecue, you can't get through the place without people trying to hand you plates of food. So as someone who's trying to relate to the Hispanic community better, don't show up empty-handed. Come with something, an offering to give, especially a food or a drink. It helps you connect with people quite much more naturally as you go through that. Next slide. All right, so one of the great challenges too is finding the right people on the ground. Hire the right people to do this work for you. So Friends of the Rappahannock hired 2 river ambassadors who were Spanish-speaking natives of our area, and those were the primary sort of mouthpieces for Friends of the Rappahannock's mission in educating the community about the river for this summer. What we found was that the Hispanic community is a very diverse community. So understand that not all people who identify as Hispanic or Latino this is not a uniform group of people. So one way that we worked with that was we hired 2 young people, both energetic young folks. One of them was Mexican in background, and the other one was from the Dominican Republic. So we found that that would help us sort of relate to the diversity of the Hispanic community. We also hired, one of them was a teacher, which we found was a really great way to find someone who could relate to young people and the broader community, who was comfortable talking and relating information but also they tend to have the summer off. So if you're going to do a summer program, finding a teacher is basically as good as you can get. One last thing as well, this is something that I think we would have done if we had known it earlier, was to find champions in the community. Instead of trying to persuade people to your team, find people who are already from that community and who are champions. If I could go back and tell myself that a few months ago, I would do it. And that's something that I'll be carrying with me along the way as I sustain this program. Next slide. All right, so one of the challenges too, which anyone who works regularly with government understands, that government employees are super busy. Governments themselves are frequently budget constrained. So it can be a little bit challenging to make the case of why your local government should communicate and commit resources to your program. So my experience was a little bit different than Nissa's in some ways. We found that Friends of the Rappahannock was the main driving force, and Defensores de la Cuenca, our partner from Northern Virginia, we were the main driving forces behind this project. The city of Fredericksburg, who was a partner of ours, went kind of along with it. They attended meetings. They were good soldiers. They signed all the forms for us, but we were the power behind this, and our funders ultimately the power behind us. And one of the challenges and reasons for that is because the sort of soft power you get from broad-based education and outreach programs pays off over years. We were lucky that this summer we had no drownings on the river, which was awesome. There were 3 in 2020, but we could easily have 5 next summer. It's not the sort of thing that's just sort of an overnight fix. So that is one challenge that we went up against. However, there are a lot of ways, if you understand the system, to communicate to your governments that it is worth their while. So one of those is you can take credit, if you are a local government, towards your existing stormwater outreach requirements through the Chesapeake Bay Act. So in the city of Fredericksburg, in the state of Virginia, we have something called the MS4 program. It's the Municipal Stormwater Program. Counties and cities that are above a certain population density are required to submit a report every year that must be accepted by DEQ. They need to say, we did outreach to a certain number of folks, and we did this many river cleanups. So this program is a great example of a way that by just putting their name on the line, the city of Fredericksburg could take credit for the outreach that Friends of the Rappahannock did. So those sorts of partnerships do help sort of these municipalities understand what sort of existing responsibilities they have and check those things off the box. Another thing we did a lot was volunteer service. Our local Parks and Rec department, like many Parks and Rec departments, doesn't always have time to pay someone to go out there with a litter bag and pick up cigarette butts at the pavilion. But FOR can do that. We have lots of volunteers that come help us with our projects. So we focused a lot on those volunteer projects. And finally, we had a great day doing a PR campaign. Basically, this was we're in election season this year, and we took full advantage of it. We invited a couple of elected officials who were up for election, and we interviewed them and had them going out there and talking to the community about the importance of the river. So shamelessly taking advantage of political circumstances to expand our reach. They even brought the county marketing department out, and they made a great video that got a lot of plays on Facebook and the county website. Next slide. All right, so our last page is some of the challenges, and opportunities associated specifically with working with the Hispanic community, many of whom are immigrants or first-generation folks who may not speak English very well. They may not be aware that you can drink the water safely in America. And by the way, did you know that river right there next to you is the source of our water that you drink? Just keeping our themes sort of simple and easy to understand was really useful for us. And, hey, yes, it is safe to swim in the river. However, please wear a life jacket. There's a rack of free life jackets over there. And if you enter into our raffle, maybe you'll get one for yourself to take home today. And honestly, the way, I have become a much better outreach person by teaching school kids on Friends of the Rappahannock's outreach education programs. You know, you have to keep things real simple for kids. And honestly, most adults don't complain when you keep your messages simple. So when you orient your message and build your message towards children, you also are doing a good job relating to adults as well. So that was another thing that I sort of learned and confirmed on this project. Yeah, and relating back to a couple of the things that Nissa brought up, two things that I totally agree with her on. One of them is patience, baby steps, work your way up, and also be sure to check in and follow up. Don't let things get to a sort of crisis moment and then the relationship sort of dissolves away. It should be the kind of person that you have a phone relationship with, or an email, you're just a phone call away. So those are two of the lessons learned that I had. Great. Next slide. I think that's all for me. So happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
Yeah, great. So Adam, thank you so much for sharing about the partnership work that you're doing there in Fredericksburg. Really appreciate the work that you're doing and sharing it with all of us here today. If you have questions for Adam, Nissa, Caroline, or myself, feel free to come off mute. You can also put your questions in the chat. And we also want to go ahead and advance to our final Slido question. So we'll kind of use this as an opportunity to sort of ask questions, but also we want to ask you some questions. And if you participate here, I think it not only will be helpful for us to hear from you, but it may be helpful to the other participants as well. We'd love to hear if there's one thing that you heard here today, what you might plan to apply to the work that you're doing in your community where you work. Also, if you have any resources, experiences, expertise, lessons learned from the work that you've done, we'd love for you to share those here too. So please, everybody, take a minute to go to the Slido, share one idea of one thing that you plan to apply to your work that you learned today, ask a question, share a resource, share an insight. We'd love to hear from everybody in these last few minutes and just sort of take advantage of all the expertise that we have here in our virtual room here today. And while we're giving everybody an opportunity to do that, Adam, I'll ask you the same question that I asked Nissa that came from Rosemary. What have you found are some of the insights that you've learned about how to, if you've been trying to form a partnership or a relationship with a utility or another community group, and that partner may not have the capacity or the time or the interest in partnering with you. What are some of the keys that you found in terms of building those authentic relationships that are mutually beneficial?
So, I think one sort of trick that we learned along the way, try to meet a lot of people, because you never know who's going to end up sticking, right? As you guys can tell from my PowerPoint, we tried a lot of different things and a few things stuck, and those are the things we're going to carry with us into our program, next summer. One of those I found was it can be a little hard to find groups of Latino and Hispanic community members in Fredericksburg. One way, though, that we found was effective was to meet with businesses. So we found that the Virginia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce has a website registry by physical location of Hispanic-owned businesses in the Fredericksburg area. And that was really something that I figured out on July 30th when I was getting ready to submit my report. But something that we're carrying with us into this fall. We actually are on the short list for a Chamber of Commerce program called the Leadership Fredericksburg Program. So Friends of the Rappahannock has proposed writing a strategic plan, which will help us make our program look a little bit more like Nissa's program, which has these sort of concrete goals and sort of workflow that we hope to mature into over time.
Yeah, thanks for that, Adam. And some of the things that I'm hearing from both you and Nissa and the other organizations that we worked with this project is just really finding like those shared areas of interest and seeing if there's a way that both organizations can benefit each other and help make the goal more likely for both entities is always so important. So yeah, and we're starting to see in the chat some other insights that are coming in. So some of the things that folks are going to take with them is that casting a broad net is important, sort of not putting, sort of thinking about all the different ways in which you might be able to partner with members of your community or with the different departments in your utility. The not showing up empty-handed was something that really resonated with Riley, and about how difficult it can be, but that it can be done, especially when it comes to getting that sort of initial step out of the way of forming a relationship with your utility. So thank you all very much for sharing that. Any final questions or insights that anyone would like to share before we wrap up here today? All right, so I'm going to put up this slide here for everyone. This is our contact information. Please feel free to follow up with us if you have any questions. One final request that I'll put out there for those of you who are still here is that WaterNow and River Network will be in the next couple of weeks publishing our report that outlines these building blocks of trust, and it'll have case studies in there from the different work group members, including the Richmond case study, as well as from the other 8 work group members. And so if you're interested in receiving a copy of that directly, put your name and your email in the chat, and I'll save the chat before we sign off and make sure that you get a copy of that when it comes out. We'd love to get that in your hands and really encourage you to share it with as many people as possible. So please do that. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our final slide and back to Ruby to wrap things up.
I have one more thing I wanted to offer to really quickly.
Oh, sure, Nissa. Yeah, please do. So
the Alliance will be working with the City of Richmond to hold one more demonstration or detailed walkthrough of the green infrastructure ranking and prioritization tool that we've developed. It is housed on the city's Power BI system. So it's not like a public facing tool that all nonprofits could necessarily get into and use. But if folks are interested in it and want to participate in that walkthrough so they can learn how it works and maybe think about developing something for their locality, please feel free to shoot me an email and we'll include you in the list or the invitation when we schedule that.
Awesome. Thank you, Nissa. And before I turn it over to Ruby, I want to say thank you to Nissa and Adam for all the wonderful work that you're doing in your community, and also for sharing it with all of us here today, as well as the report that's going to be coming out, and for and all the different ways in which you work to share the work that you're doing with others who want to do something similar. And I want to say a big thank you to Caroline for being a wonderful partner in this project. It's great to really be able to work with Caroline and WaterNow on this project, and their partnership in this effort has been invaluable. And so it's really great to have you here today, Caroline, and sharing the insights that we learned along the way of doing this project. So thank you to all 3 of you.
Thanks to you, April, for getting us all together, and to Adam and Nissa as well. Every time I hear you all talk about your projects, I am just so inspired and I learn something new every time. So really happy to have you part of this work.
Okay, let's give a virtual hand to the speakers. Great presentation and great work. Share your experiences, and actually first, if you can click rate session on the session page on Whova, that would be great. And be ready for the next session, which I believe is tonight at 7, the virtual trivia night. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Caroline. Great job.
Bye. Thanks, April. You too. I thought that went really well.
Yeah, I enjoyed our interview process. It was great to use that format, and thank you for being a willing partner of trying that out.
Absolutely. I'm open to experiment.
Me too. All right, you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
hosting. Thank you.
April,
Yeah.
just so you know, April, okay,
Yeah.
all the people that submitted names and emails, I'm not sure if you got them, if you're quick, but I did put them in the run of show if you'd like them there as well, just so you have them.
Perfect, thank you. I did save the chat, but
Oh,
I
good.
really appreciate you doing that. Thank you so
Of
much.
course, no problem.
Ruby, thank you so much. It was wonderful to meet you.
Yeah, I hope to see you again, and please keep us in mind. You know, looking for help with your work. We're happy to help.
Would love that. Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.